Night lowers over the forbidden city, lamps gutter, then steady, and the vermilion walls hold their breath. Candlelight travels the length of a corridor like a thought you're not supposed to have. A woman, swaddled in a blanket, gathers herself and moves, not walking, not daring the echo of heels, but inching forward as if the floor were measuring her. Outside, a eunuch's sandals meet stone. Tap, pause, tap, the rhythm of a rule. In this hour, even the air behaves. No one exhales too loudly. No one invents a heartbeat. No one is allowed to love, and no one is allowed to choose. That is the grammar of the harem tonight. Every visit a move on a board where the pieces think they're alive. Yet the board is what wins. 3,000 names exist here, engraved on wood in stories, inked in ledgers in practice, and a single choice can draft a life upward, or erase it so softly that only the moths remember. Favour is a blade in a silk sheath. Affection, if it dares to show itself, is taxed like a luxury. Behind the thin silk curtain, a choreography waits, not of desire, but of duty. Imperial visitation sounds private, almost domestic, as if one lamp and one room could contain it. In truth, it is a national ritual. It begins in offices, not bedrooms. In schedules, not size. The door matters less than the desk, the curtain less than the clerk, who notes a time beside a name and draws a line that will be believed tomorrow. Listen. The city inside the city speaks in watches, not hours. The fifth watch nears. Water has fallen through the clepsydra bowls. The bell at a gate answers the wooden clapper of a night patrol. Frost writes on the railings. Oil in the lamps throws an amber haze over the eaves, and the carved beasts along the roofline stare at nothing. Sound travels in sheets here. Even a sleeve can be loud. Two maids inhale together and become a crime of breath. A shadow moves, and every rule in the building leans to listen. Our woman stops beneath a screen with pale cranes painted on it. One candle trembles. She tightens the blanket, not against cold alone, but against attention, and waits for the signal that will close her choices and open the door. In the stories told by kitchen fires and dismissed with a cough by scholars, there is crawling, there is the foot of the bed, there is silence like a law. Some parts are rumour, some are memory, some are theatre, all of them are pressure. She knows which ones to obey. Beyond her, a chain of rooms conducts the night. Antechamber, inner hall, the still geography of ceremony. Somewhere on a desk, a roster, or a little tablet, or simply a line in a book, the empire's handwriting with its clean vertical confidence. A eunuch's nail taps the paper, once, to confirm the order. Ink dries, a seal cools. You might call this intimacy. The archive would call it a record. The difference between the two is where fear lives. In another courtyard, a lantern is being trimmed, a wick lifted, snipped, and a guard yawns into his sleeve so the yawn won't travel. The rules are granular here. Who bows first? Whose sleeves should touch the floor? Which corridor is used for approach? Which for return? By dawn, the steps will be brushed, the ash sifted, and tonight will exist only as a crease in the bedding and the smallest change in a ledger. And in a woman's face, if anyone is brave enough to look at it in daylight. No one is allowed to love. It is not a poem, it is policy felt in the body. The woman thinks of afternoons when the sun threw squares of gold across a stone bench, of the smell of ginkgo in late autumn, of a music lesson that ended with laughter she was not supposed to show. She thinks fast, then folds the thoughts away like contraband silk. There are eyes in the walls, there are ears in the floor. Even private happiness must be moved through the mind with tongs. What is chosen here does not end here. A visit is a preface. To physicians summoned, to midwives counted, to jealousies that learn the sound of a particular footstep. The curtain hides little from those who understand the building. This window for air, that niche for lamp oil, that door that sticks in damp weather so you can tell the season from the sound it makes. If tenderness appears, it must dress itself in the vocabulary of protocol: standing, kneeling, dismissing, recording. The verb to feel is not conjugated in this room. The verb to document is. Who wins is a question asked softly, because power dislikes being personified. The heart does not often win. It does not even get to compete officially. What wins is procedure, a calm, faceless arithmetic. Rank leans on rank like stacked tablets. Desire may flutter, but it is the roster that flies. Somewhere a junior clerk has beautiful calligraphy. He inscribes a name without ever seeing the person it belongs to. By morning, his work will matter more than any whisper breathed tonight. The woman waits. A sleeve brushes stone, slow, then stops. A signal. She feels the city tilt. The blanket is both garment and sentence. It says, "You are here to be correct." Feet inside the cloth, knees measuring distance, she learns again the geometry of submission. There is no music, there is timing, there is no bedroom, there is jurisdiction. Every step is an event that can be reported in the morning without adjectives. Outside the lattice work, the winter sky hangs like poured lead. Inside, a flame discovers the edge of a bowl and trembles, one note, then steadies. The eunuchs remain the shape of attention. If anyone speaks, it is in fragments that are almost not speech. Now, here, wait. You could call it reverence or logistics or fear. The words behave themselves. The hands do what the words imply. The room, trained by years of repetition, offers neither help nor mercy. It simply receives. And yet, there is the human fact, a pulse at the wrist that refuses to be ceremonial, a small scar on the left knuckle from a childhood fall, a song remembered against orders, tuned down to breath, a future that may be written tonight or not at all. The woman feels time as a temperature shift, warmer near the lamp, colder near the floor. She hears a bell, not grand but practical, and thinks even the hours are kept in custody here. When the door moves, it moves like paper, softly, insistently, and the room rearranges itself around the entering figure as if the walls owed him their angles. Nothing shouts, nothing breaks. A decision that belongs to a nation will now be performed as if it belonged to two people. The curtain, slender as an eyelid, falls into place again. Outside, the ledger waits to be convinced. We begin here, at the breathless edge of a ritual that looks like privacy and behaves like law. The woman draws the blanket higher. The building inhales. Somewhere the ink thinks of drying. Behind silk, a sentence is about to be spoken without words, and the empire will nod and say, "It remembered to happen." By daylight, the palace looks like architecture. By night, it becomes a system. Corridors turn into channels. Doors become valves. A breath taken in one room moves the needle of a ledger 2 courtyards away. What people call a harem, a chorus of silks, a rumour of perfume, is in practice a bureaucracy with bedrooms. The Qing court perfected its grammar. Ranks above feelings, offices beside pillows, signatures before sighs. The rule is simple, and it is everywhere. The body serves the file. The hierarchy announces itself before a single foot crosses a threshold. Empress, the still centre, her seal heavier than the rest. Imperial noble consort, a moon with its own weather. Then noble consorts, concubines, down through finely stepped titles for women who wait in rooms named for flowers they rarely touch. Below them, attendants with pretty names and very precise duties. The staircase is steep but polished, each rung a ritual, each ritual an account. Promotions happen like eclipses, slow in calculation, sudden in effect, and demotions fall as softly as dust, but are impossible to sweep back up. Surrounding all of this is the engine that turns the Imperial Household Department, Neiwufu, the Emperor's inward government, not a ministry for the Empire, a ministry for him. It keeps stores and wardrobes, manages workshops, issues stipends and fabric bolts and lamp oil, pays the singers on festival nights, writes the lists that decide who eats which pears and where the pears came from. Its courtyards do not thunder with debate, they click with abacus rods. Within this lattice sits Jingshifang, the office that touches the emperor's day at the scale of minutes. Here, the habit of living becomes paperwork. Notes go in, orders come out, messengers cross winter courtyards with a sleeve wrapped over a bamboo slip. If desire ever visits, it knocks at an office first. The strictness is not a rumour. It is visible in small things. The hour a brazier may be replenished, the pattern of a sleeve for the third rank, which door a first attendant uses at dusk. How many characters a maid writes in her monthly household report. There is a roster for physicians, midwives who have seen too much and say very little. A roster for cooks, for laundry, for guards who do not look into rooms as they pass them. The sound of control is not a shout, it is the repetitive quiet of identical tasks done correctly. At the level of selection, the machine starts well before any curtain stirs. Young women, banner-born, clan-registered, are examined like paragraphs in a long statute. Family lines, behaviour, instruction in instruments and needlework, entered, verified, filed. The word chosen arrives late. First comes eligible, then suitable, then placed. In the court's own logic, this is kindness, to fit a person to an office the way a hand fits a glove. In the lived life, kindness is not the right word. Even the notion of choosing for the night, so often told as a scene of whim, is usually an act of procedure. The story speaks of wooden tags, names carved, a hand that hovers and descends. The record speaks in other objects, slips, schedules, clerks who coordinate what will later be remembered as chance. Sometimes it is one and sometimes the other. What matters is that every yes must be legible by morning. The chamber is not empty when the door closes. It is crowded with tomorrow's paperwork. Inside the households of rank, senior palace women keep the rhythm. They are not officials in the sense carved on steelies. They are officials in the sense that the building trusts them. They count towels and tally coal, assign maids to lamps and carpets and basins, monitor the comings and goings of small items that are large when they disappear. They do not raise their voices to enforce rules. They remove a privilege for a month and speak to no one about it. Power in the harem has a temperature barely above room, and that is why it lasts. The eunuchs too are a hierarchy. The young learn to walk so the floorboards do not answer them. The middle ranks carry notes and trays and the news that reorders a corridor. The older ones tend to clocks and seals, to the order of rooms, to the continuity of a silence that makes work possible. The Ming had once allowed eunuchs to tower. The Qing bent them into a careful arch, useful, supervised everywhere, like bridge work you only notice when it fails. They are eyes without opinion, hands without signatures, witnesses whose memory belongs to the office that pays them. From rank flows routine. Dawn, inventory breathes, lacquered cupboards open, the colour of the day is assigned to sleeves. A schedule settles on each person like a tailored coat. Midday, petitions elsewhere. Within these walls, repairs. A torn screen mended so expertly the tear becomes a rumour. Dusk, the courtyard rehearses its hush. Braziers are fed, the winter wind combs the pines. Night, watches counted, lamps trimmed, corridors divided into approach and retreat. Between them, the small commerce of survival, a favour banked, a word passed along the legal way, a kindness done that will be repaid in a season that has not yet been named. Intimacy is a national ritual. Say it slowly. The words feel strange together, and then correct. Because to the court, intimacy is not a private weather event. It is a line in the succession's long arithmetic. Visits lead to records. Records lead to confirmations. Confirmations lead to a change in how 24 people bow to the same woman the next morning. There is a chain between a lamp put out at midnight and a title conferred 6 months later, and the chain has more iron in it than you think. Control reaches into gestures. A sleeve held at a certain angle says rank. A pause at a threshold says caution. The speed at which a maid presents a basin says training. The quality of a silence says knowledge. None of these is written in law, and all of them are enforceable. Punishment is not always a blow. It is an assignment to a colder corridor, a removal from a festival, a door that stops opening when you approach it. The building has ways to teach. To enter this world is to be renumbered. A girl with a village in her voice learns capital diction. A laugh is trimmed to fit the room. A name becomes a position. A position becomes a responsibility dressed in brocade. She is not simply in love, or not in love. She is ranked, scheduled, witnessed, and archived. She may never hold a seal. She will live by seals. She may never compose an edict. She will be edited by edicts. If she dreams of choice, she learns to dream in the margins. And yet the human persists, stubborn, particulate, a favourite teacup hidden behind a screen, a maid who hums the end of a song while counting bolts of silk, a moment in a corridor where 2 people meet eyes and nobody writes it down. These are not reforms, they are leaks. The system tolerates leaks the way a great wall tolerates a hairline crack. It notes them, it paints them, it measures them again in spring. By the time the lamps thin and the chill settles, by the time an order has left a desk and crossed a hand and altered a night, the machine appears complete. But machines in palaces run on more than rules. They run on belief that a ledger is safer than a vow, that hierarchy is kinder than luck, that tomorrow is made by the clerk who writes, not by the heartbeat he cannot hear. In such belief, women live and step and bow, and in such belief an empire convinces itself it is merciful. It begins, people say, with a piece of wood, a tag the size of a palm, a name cut into it so cleanly the strokes seem wet. After supper the tray appears, lacquer dark as tea just before it cools, and somewhere a hand hovers. This is the story the palace tells itself when it wants destiny to look simple. A tag turns over, a life turns with it, and the night proceeds as if a token were a compass. But palaces prefer procedures to charms. Behind the tray there is a table, behind the table a room, behind the room an office with shelves that smell of paste and winter. In that office, adjacent to the emperor's day, the way breath is adjacent to speech, a clerk straightens a brush tip, wipes the inkstone, copies a roster. He does not carve names, he renders them exact vertical, without adjectives. The legend shows a hand choosing. The record shows writing choosing, schedules choosing, senior women noting who is rested, who is unwell, who is observing a rite. Both stories fit on the same tray. Only one will be binding at dawn. People love objects, and the wooden tag behaves beautifully on screen. It is small, which makes it tender, and heavy, which makes it serious. You can hear it when it knocks the rim of a dish, a wooden syllable, the night's first verdict. Some say ivory, some say bamboo, some say bone. Some insist the letters were inlaid with emerald lacquer, or traced in red so the name would lift in lamplight. What survives, in any case, is the feeling that fate has a texture, and the knowledge that someone else polishes it. After evening, Rice the Palace changes temperature. Kitchens exhale, braziers shiver and then recover. The women of rank sit in rooms that know their names better than anyone else does. They speak softly to their attendants, not a plan, not a plea, only the kind of conversation that can be quoted safely if it travels. Outside, runners move. Inside, a card table is cleared, and someone looks for a jade bead lost in a hem months ago and never found. Waiting invents small rituals to keep from dramatizing itself. The first gate to pass is not a door, it is a list. At Jingxi Fang, the evening sheet is reconciled with the month's ledger. Notes arrive as folded slips, a physician's mark, a steward's update, a correction about whose household is short of charcoal. This is not romance, it is logistics, but logistics raised to a theology. The palace believes in the god of smooth nights. If the god is honoured, dawn will be tidy. If dawn is tidy, rule looks gentle. So yes, a tray may be borne into a warm-lit hall. Names may gleam, the way a music scale gleams on the day you first hear what it is trying to teach you. An older eunuch carries the weight of attention at shoulder height. A younger one matches his pace to the older man's breathing. There is choreography even in moving paper. Breath in, step. Breath out, set the tray down. Do not let the silk. Sleeve touch the lacquer. Oil marks look like disrespect. The air bends a little around the lacquered weight as if the building were taking a look. How much of this is whim, and how much is a calendar? Court stories ask that question to make the night sound political. Households ask it to make the night survivable. The safe answer is both. There are patterns the emperor keeps as a way of keeping himself, a rotation that feels like fairness, an exception that signals affection, a reversion to order that reassures ministers who do not sleep here but insist that their empire does. There are also patterns the palace keeps for him, a rhythm managed by senior attendants who know which rooms are harmonious together and which rooms, if set too close in time, will combust. In kitchens, rumour fries in sesame oil. Somebody swears the tags are not random at all, that the tray is shuffled, but every shuffle has a mind. Somebody else shakes their head and quotes a proverb about the moon dipping into every courtyard in its time. Rumour is a kind of heat. Too much of it, and the food burns. In the offices, heat is avoided. The brush tip remains damp, the copy neat, the stamp exact. Palaces must cool their own blood if they hope to last. The tag, if there is a tag, bears a name, but the night bears a dossier. Women are not moved like coins, they are moved like files. A senior maid knows the creak in a hinge 2 rooms away, and what it will sound like after rain. She schedules around that knowledge the way a tactician schedules around a river. A matron of the inner household knows which corridor takes a minute longer because the floor slopes in winter. She uses that minute to let one person inhale and another person exhale. Bureaucracy seems cold until you notice the little mercies it performs to keep from breaking the people it measures. There is an etiquette of not looking when the tray arrives, a palace's way of saying, fate has privacy. Eyes drop, backs find a not quite bow that does not presume. The emperor's hand, if it hesitates, is the only honest hand in the room. Everyone else is pretending not to be a weather vane. In that pause, 3 heartbeats, perhaps 4, all the stories people tell about power come to work. The hero story, where choice is lightning. The machine story, where choice is voltage regulated by a transformer 3 courtyards away. The domestic story, where a room becomes a world for exactly the length of a candle mark, and then returns everyone to their ranks. Some nights the legend wins. A finger touches a name as if the wood were warm. A voice says a word too soft for a clerk to record. The tray withdraws like a tide that understood your wish. Some nights the ledger wins, the rotation holds. The exception is postponed. The universe continues to think of itself as fair. Neither outcome changes the fact that a corridor will be walked, a lamp trimmed, a threshold crossed with a sleeve, lifted just so. Even miracles have to pass through doors. There are those who claim the tags carried tiny notes, a symbol here, a dot there, a discrete code for a mood, a health caution, an auspicious hour. There are those who laugh and say the only code that matters is timing, that the best moments are always the ones a room chooses for you. The truth, as it often does in palaces, sits in the middle. People make systems, and systems learn their makers. Preferences are learned the way corridors are learned, by walking them until the body turns before the mind remembers why. Somewhere far from the tray, a girl in training learns how to carry hot water without looking like she's carrying anything at all. Another learns how to fold a blanket so it holds its shape. Another learns the difference between an apology and a report, the number of breaths between sentence and bow. They will not touch the tray, they will touch everything that happens because of it. This is how a building maintains the illusion that decisions are simple, by distributing complexity until no single pair of hands feels it as weight. When the choice is made, however it is made, the room releases a breath it did not admit it was holding. The older eunuch advances. The younger one receives the signal with a glance practiced so long it looks like stillness. A name is carried outward through a door that was measured in another century into air that tastes of pine and coal. The world tilts, not much, only as far as a brush tip bends, and a corridor begins to behave like a fate. The rest of the night will be narrated as if it began with a tag. The building will let that story stand. It is easier to believe in wood than in invisible calendars, in a single descending hand than in a dozen hands arranging a permission no one speaks aloud. But the women who live here, and the men whose lives are spent carrying rooms across distances, know a different sentence, one that moves without calling attention to its verbs. A visit is scheduled, witnessed, recorded. The tag is the shadow on the ritual sundial. The sun is elsewhere. And yet, because people require symbols to carry what they cannot comfortably name, the tag endures. It passes into plays, into gossip, into the hush of a song that palace maids learn and forget and learn again. It gives the night a handle. It lets the city say, the empire turned, not because 1,000 small obediences align themselves like gears, but because wood obeyed a hand. Let the story have its object. Let the object have its shine. In the quiet, where choices are converted into ink, the clerk will not object. The brush is busy. The ledger is listening. A name has been chosen, or scheduled, or permitted by a rotation whose fairness is indistinguishable from fate. Lamps step aside. Footfalls become rules. The night moves into its next room and the tray retires like an actor who has played his scene. Well, outside, winter gathers at the eaves and waits for the hour when records become morning. The message arrives the way night itself arrives. Without hurry, without error. A sleeve at the threshold, a nod too small to quote. Prepare. That is the whole sentence. It carries the weight of a bell. The room remembers what to do before the women inside it do. Screens slide. A brazier breathes. Water goes to heat. Bathhouses in the inner court are not grand. They are exact. Steam lifts in pale sheets, gathering against carved rafters and beading on the edge of blue-glazed tiles. A wooden bucket, sanded soft by years of use, accepts water that is neither hot enough to redden the skin nor cool enough to leave a shiver. On a low shelf, powders and oils, osmanthus, a faint sandalwood, a thread of camphor to quiet the air. A comb waits in a porcelain dish. No mirrors larger than a hand, no sudden noise. Even cleanliness here has ranks. The summons is precise, not a request, not a romance, and the body answers with the choreography of habit. Hair is combed until it lies with its own gravity. Nails are checked, cleaned, rounded. The skin is dried by cloths that have been counted already, whose threads belong to a ledger. The scent chosen is a whisper. The palace does not like perfumes that arrive before a person does. 2 attendants, sleeves tied back, move like copyists, each pass of a cloth the stroke of a brush, each fold returned to its place. Jewellery is removed. The reason is practical and old. Glinting metal makes eyes behave. Sharp edges make guards suspicious. A ring can conceal a message. A hairpin can become more than a hairpin. The room understands and does not argue. A tray is brought, bone white, quiet, and a pair of bracelets that look heavier than they are become 2 small moons at rest. A maid touches the rim of the tray with one finger so it will not chime when lifted. Nothing must volunteer a sound. There is a story, told low, told often, that says, after bathing, no garments are put on. The woman is wrapped wholly in a quilted blanket. The blanket is not only cloth, it is policy and cotton. It simplifies inspection. It prevents a hidden blade or a hidden note or a hidden plan. It announces submission without speech. In accounts fit for scholars, this practice is a rumour with stamina, a tradition of the tongue. In rooms like this, it is followed because people live by cautions, not footnotes. The blanket is lifted, set, secured, a swaddling of adulthood, and the woman sits very straight within its walls. Waiting begins. Waiting must not look like wanting. An attendant warms her hands above the brazier, and then warms the rim of a porcelain cup, so the rim will not steal heat from the tea. Another watches the door the way a clock watches weather. The woman, rapt, breathes in a rhythm learned long ago, 4 heartbeats in, hold, 4 out, as if timing could be persuaded to be kind. The corridor beyond the door has its own pulse. Somewhere a guard rehearses not yawning. Somewhere a flame remembers to be small. Crawling, people say, is the rule. Not a glide across polished floorboards, not the insolence of standing from the foot of the bed. The tale has all the features legends favour, a precise image, a humiliation clear enough to pass from ear to ear, a silence that behaves like law. The archive keeps its distance from such sentences. The women do not. The women are practical. If crawling keeps peace with a world that wants to read posture as obedience, then knees are a kind of armour. If a rule is only whisper law, it still instructs. We know what the building expects, says an older attendant without moving her mouth. The escort arrives like punctuation at the end of a long clause. 2 eunuchs at the door, one to speak to the air and one to speak to the hallway. They do not announce, they confirm. The blanket becomes a carriage. Hands that have practiced gentleness lift, adjust, turn. A 3rd figure steps back to keep space clear. They leave the room without stirring its temperature. Behind them, a girl in training notices how a sleeve is held to prevent a draught from offending a flame. She will copy that gesture for the rest of her working life. Corridors for approach are not the same as corridors for return. This is not ceremony, it is plumbing. Flow must be managed. The path is measured, a corner where one always pauses, a screen that hides an ugly patch of wall, but mostly hides the fact that eyes are sometimes tired. On winter nights, the floor keeps a memory of daytime cold. Straw sandals disagree with it. The blanket, held close, keeps breath from rising as fog in the lamplight. The building dislikes exhalations that can be counted. At thresholds, Gestures perform rank. A steward's nod shallows. An older palace woman extends exactly 2 fingers to steady what does not need steadying, a courtesy disguised as logistics. The woman inside the blanket permits herself only the movement the building allows. When the door you have been thinking about for an hour finally exists in front of you, your job is to remember that it is not a door. It is an instruction. Inside, nothing is allowed to sound like theatre, even if every element is staged. A screen throws silk-coloured light across the bed frame. The bedding is crisp as a page. A basin waits on a stand, the towel folded in that specific rectangle that indicates someone senior checked it. If the room is warm, it is because warmth is on the checklist. If the room is dim, it is because dimness is the default for conversations that are not supposed to be called conversations. People speak in fragments. People stop speaking before those fragments can learn to be sentences. Silence, the women know, has dialects. There is the silence that keeps you from hearing a name you should not know. There is the silence that keeps someone else from hearing your fear. There is the silence that makes a room sound obedient. Tonight requires all 3. No sound, say the stories, and what they mean is no sound that reveals more than the ritual wishes to reveal. The building is a listener with a perfect memory. It forgets nothing except on purpose. From outside, supervision is present the way mathematics is present in music. You do not hear it, you hear its results. Counts are kept. Minutes accumulate in calm columns. A call can be made when a certain watermark reaches a certain line, not because desire is wrong, but because schedules make tomorrow possible. 12 watches become 5, 5 become 3. The number does not matter as much as the rule. Events must fit inside time the way words fit inside a margin. When time ends, a voice will do what a bell does. Make an ending that can be recognized and filed. Security is a choreography hidden in courtesy. No jewels, no pins. Sleeves that cannot conceal surprises. Rugs that do not slide. A footstool in a place where feet will be, so that no one has to stumble into history. The palace prefers accidents that can be explained in one sentence and filed in one line. Anything larger than that threatens to become a story, and stories breed at a rate that troubles empires. Across all this, there is tenderness that refuses to vanish. An attendant positions a cup so the handle points to the hand that will need it. Another lowers a wick, not for thrift, but for kindness, to eyes that have read too much ink today. The woman inside the blanket notices, and the noticing steadies her. She is not naive. She knows the blanket is a script. She also knows people improvise inside scripts. A hand adjusts a fold so it will not crease her collarbone. This too is a kind of care. If the legend of crawling is obeyed, it is obeyed with a precision that keeps it from becoming spectacle. The blanket releases just enough for knees to find the known line of approach. The foot of the bed is touched as if it were a border. The air near the mattress is a different weather, warmer, heavier with the breath of the hour. The mind steadies itself. Count the knots in the wood. Notice the grain. Do not notice what noticing cannot help. In a world that measures you, you learn to count what does not count against you. What follows is not ours to narrate. What follows is what the room is built to contain, and the archive is built to tidy. We can say only this. Protocols exist to shape a danger into a ritual, to convert private risk into public order. Some of those protocols are ink, some are rumour. Some are both at once, surviving because they are useful, not because they are true. The women live between them, the way a river lives between banks it did not choose. When it ends, as all nights end, the room returns to being a room. The basin is emptied. The towel resumes its neatness. The blanket becomes only a blanket again. Outside, the corridor waits with the patience of a ledger that has never missed a line. The woman is lifted, turned, guided. Silence walks with her like an old instructor who does not need to speak anymore. In another building, the brush that will convert experience into record has already been cleaned. Later, when courtyards are still and winter stoops to look in the eaves, someone will say, "She crawled." Someone else will say, "She was carried." Both will be right in the way palaces make things right, enough for a tale, enough for a file. By dawn, the only proof that anything happened will be a crease that fades when the bedding is smoothed, a cup that smells faintly of osmanthus, and a line of characters that look like any other line of characters. Policy and cotton folded and put away. The body once again, a document. Time here is not a number. It is an office. Night bends around instruments, a water clock hushed behind a screen, a stick of incense calibrated to a mark on a bronze tray, the bell at a distant gate answering the wooden clapper of the patrol. Inside, the flame on the lamp performs its small arithmetic. Shorter wick, shorter hour. And a senior attendant keeps count without ever looking like she is counting. Ritual is a corridor. Time is the usher who moves you along. Supervision does not announce itself. It exists the way geometry exists in a roof, unseen, load-bearing. A pair of eunuchs stand where walls turn into corners. Another remains just beyond the inner threshold, with a ledger folded like a fan against his palm. A fourth attends to air and lamps, which is to say to mood as an administrative task. People tell numbers, 12, 6, a phalanx of eyes. But the number matters less than the fact that every watcher is a metronome. They do not watch for scandal, they watch for schedule. Minutes accumulate like rice into a measuring cup, not dramatic, exact. The notation for this night will read as calmly as any other: a name, a time of approach, a time of departure, the initials of those who witnessed the passage from private choreography to public record. What we call intimacy, the palace recognizes as a period, a bracketed interval belonging partly to physicians and partly to the people who open and close doors on time. When the hour arrives, not late, not early, but arriving with that slightly ceremonial rightness good clerks admire, a voice at the door performs its office, not a shout, a phrase in the key of respect, steady mid-volume, the syllables spaced as if they were steps. If there is no answer, the phrase repeats, never louder in anger, only louder in function. Time does not scold, it clarifies. The third call is rarely needed. Buildings train people, people train knights. Inside, objects understand what to do. The blanket lifts a little, then settles. A basin is moved to a neutral position. The lamp, if high, is lowered to the height at which saying goodbye is easier. The room converts from performance to exit, with an efficiency learned from 1,000 evenings. Nobody hurries. Hurrying belongs to houses without confidence. The Forbidden City has confidence. It allows endings to look unremarkable. What leaves first is not the woman, it is the risk. Pins are already elsewhere. Fabric behaves. A fold that could snag is smoothed without ceremony. The woman's breath re-enters its daytime pattern, shorter at the top, deeper at the bottom, and she receives the blanket not as erasure, but as policy. Knees remember the approach and reverse it. If crawling is theatre, it is at least theatre with a reliable script. If it is rumour, rumour has decided to behave like a rule for everyone's convenience. At the threshold, the world begins again. The watch outside records two things. The moment the door sighed and the moment the corridor accepted footsteps. One attendant observes the floor the way a sailor observes water, noting the chill that rises, the slip that might happen, the small squeak that a carpenter will fix before spring. Another measures the air, Enough for comfort, not enough for breath to cloud and betray a pulse. Return paths never cross approach paths. Flow like rank is directional. Punishments exist, but not the way stories prefer them. The Empire rarely announces wrath with trumpets. It annotates. An infraction becomes a line, improper ornament in chamber, which is to say, jewellery. Inaudible disturbance reported by watch, which is to say, a sound someone decided to notice. The first response is administrative gravity, a removed privilege, a colder room, a duty reassigned to knights that draft the spirit thinner. Flogging belongs to the repertoire, exile to an unloved quarter belongs to the vocabulary. But most discipline arrives as a difference in how doors behave for you next month. The phrase cold palace travels well because it is easy to imagine. In practice, it is not a single place with a plaque. It is a sentence of temperature and distance, rooms at the rim of the hive, fewer braziers, walks that lengthen a minute at a time until you arrive at a life you did not choose. A musician hears the music move farther away. A clever woman finds that cleverness now requires twice the effort to move half the space. You can be ruined without a spectacle. The building knows how. Does anyone soften this regime? They do, in ways that cannot be quoted. A senior maid trades her own free hour to take a younger attendant's shift after an error, so the error will vanish under neatness. A clerk files a note in a way that suggests correction rather than accusation. A steward chooses a word that does not bruise on the page. These are not rebellions. They are techniques of mercy that let the machine claim it has a heart without changing its pistons. There is, too, the practical theology of time's end. The call has been made, the answer accepted, the route cleared. In the dark, the lamp is shielded with a hand so flame will not gossip. The woman is carried by the blanket and by practice, light, not because she is small, but because the people lifting her have done this enough to match her breath. A door that opened like a law closes like a sentence ending in a period instead of an exclamation. Quiet earns its pay. Back in the origin room, the temperature remembers its earlier self. A brazier ticks softly. A cup is placed where a hand will reach without looking. If relief arrives, it arrives disguised as posture, shoulders that forget to be official for the duration of one inhale. The attendants do their work in reverse. Oils capped, comb returned, cloths counted. Inventory does not burst into song when a night ends well. Inventory simply balances. Somewhere between these rooms, ink dries. A mark in a ledger becomes a fact that can be leaned on tomorrow, by a physician, by a matron, by whoever binds the month's records into a bundle with twine that smells faintly of cinnamon. The city inside the city has made another conversion, living into documentation. It does this without blasphemy. It believes in documentation. Documentation preserves order, and order is the throne's sleep. Order, though, is also a mood, and moods can be broken. This is why the call must be obeyed, why voices must not rise, why jewellery learns to be absent. The palace has learned to fear events that require adjectives. Adjectives invite memory. Memory breeds testimony. Testimony is the beginning of trouble. The safest history is a neat column of nouns and numbers that other nouns and numbers can reference without embarrassment. By the time the watch turns, by the time a bell meets its echo on another wall, the danger is mostly administrative, a fever that goes unremarked, a whisper that finds a staircase, a favour that demands an interest rate too high to pay. Against such dangers, the building deploys its cures: routine, segregation of paths, the old dignity of small voices doing small tasks exactly. Of all the inventions here, the most impressive is the ability to end things at the right time. Near dawn, frost makes lace of the courtyard stones. The woman sits again where we met her in the previous watch. Not the same, not different, and the blanket is folded until it resembles any other blanket. A maid notes the remaining heat in the cup and tips it away delicately, as if not to wake a sleeping hour. Outside, the patrol's clapper speaks, then quiets. Inside, the air lets itself be ordinary. Night has been measured, witnessed, concluded. The ledger approves. The day can proceed to pretend that what matters most in a palace is always spoken aloud. And if, in that pre-dawn hush, she allows herself a private sentence, no longer than a breath, no heavier than a bead of water on tile, it is not a prayer and not a curse. It is a promise to keep learning the city's grammar of endings. She will need it. Everyone here does. The Empire is busiest when it is closing a door softly. A night ends, the ledger dries, but the story does not. What follows the hush behind silk is an arithmetic that outlives candles, a visit recorded, a witness mark folded. Then the question that palaces pretend is simple and everyone knows is not. Will this night be allowed to lead to a child? Not a feeling, a policy. Not a hope, a process. Rumour, warm and quick, says a eunuch whispers at the threshold. Shall it be kept? A yes that opens a life, a no that orders erasure. The rumour is dramatic, it travels well. The record speaks more slowly. Permission, if it exists, begins earlier, in calendars, in household notes, in the way physicians shade a day from grey to gold. There are rotations that favour rest. There are rotations that favour heirs. The harem does not gamble without odds the clerks can recognise. If conception is to be pursued, the machine adjusts itself by increments you almost miss. Diets shift, richer broth, steadier heat. Work is reassigned. Fewer late watches, fewer stone-cold corridors. The Imperial Medical Office draws a neat frame around certain days, and midwives who have seen every kind of luck begin to stand a little closer to certain doors. No proclamations, only a persuasion of routines. And yet, because the human heart loves a phrase that can carry the weight of a destiny, people keep the question alive in kitchens and side yards. Shall it be kept? Perhaps no one ever asks it aloud. Perhaps it is asked everywhere, constantly, in the grammar of scheduling and the music of footsteps. In this palace, decisions rarely dress as sentences. They prefer to arrive as timetables. If a child comes, if the months gather and the world alters its angle, paper multiplies. The line that once read simply visit becomes a branch. A note joins a note, dates of nausea, of fevers that did not become stories, of cravings a maid learns how to satisfy at odd hours. A physician's character appears in a new column. 2 senior attendants sign beneath it in a practiced duet. The palace likes double signatures. It likes proof that comes with harmony. Do not mistake this for tenderness. It is governance expressed as care. The womb is a room the empire wants to inventory. Lineage has always been a ledger, but here it is a ledger that breathes. An heir would not only be a child, he would be a corridor opening, a staircase offered, a map revised to move a woman from one circle of influence into another. Titles sleep in chests until a birth wakes them. Ranks that were polite become urgent. First, quiet protection. The mother-to-be is not declared, she is buffered. An older woman, trusted and uninteresting to the eye, takes over the morning walks. Rugs are changed, so the floor becomes a kindness. Seaweed appears in soup. A stool is placed where standing would have been a lesson in poise. The palace can be cruel. It can also be precise about comfort when comfort serves the file. Then, verification, not only of the body, of the fact of pregnancy, but of sequence and legitimacy. Which night? Which watch? Which witnesses? The clerk who copied lines without adjectives now copies them with attention sharpened to a thin point. A name will travel with this child, the mother's of course, but so will a web of times and approvals. When power changes hands, paperwork remembers what breath forgets. The genealogy seals wait in a room that disdains drama. UDA, genealogical books with the calm of carved jade, are designed to make quarrels run out of breath. They will be opened later, not now. Now is for living. Now is for the heavy simplicity of months. Spring pours itself into courtyards. Summer steams the eaves. The mother counts days by the sound of fruit vendors outside the outer walls and pretends the city is smaller than it is. She learns how to sit without making a point of sitting. She learns the palace's favourite kind of bravery, unnoticeable. Status moves, not always publicly, not always as much as stories want, but a maid learns to bow a fraction deeper. A steward decides which bolts of silk are suitable without being told why. A physician is invited to walk a shorter path in the rain. The harem's weather changes first. The empire's weather will notice later. Jealousies are stirred, then disguised as piety, then stirred again. In the absence of thunder, people become weather themselves. There is politics to every midwife's step. Who is present at the morning pulse? Who is absent and says it was fate? Who brings a fruit that was not requested and says it was a coincidence? Who corrects a roster so a rival loses one afternoon of air? Alliances sharpen, then smile. A woman reads the room the way a general reads terrain and finds that the smallest hill matters more than the prettiest view. Every kindness has an address. Every address has a cost. Some nights a memory knocks, the rumour again, cruel and simple. Shall it be kept? There are darker versions. Hands on a belly, a pressure disguised as procedure, a removal disguised as mercy. You will hear anything if you listen through enough doors. The archive cannot corroborate such whispers. The body remembers them anyway. Fear hoards detail. Wisdom edits it. The women, practical as always, learn the middle sentence, the one that neither repeats the worst nor denies what danger can do when it is bored. If the child is a son, the air changes temperature, not because daughters are unloved, but because maps prefer straight lines. Congratulations are composed by people who did not participate. Gifts circulate, old laments wake, about fate and fairness, about the syllables that carry weight and the syllables that only ever reach as far as a cradle. The mother becomes a different noun. She will be watched more closely and looked at less directly. It is a paradox the palace solves by multiplication, more attendance, more silence. Recognition is a ceremony of verbs. To recognize, to inscribe, to seal, to notify. The emperor signs where emperors have signed before. A steward wraps the document in cloth that smells faintly of cedar. A messenger walks the distance between two courtyards as if it were the length of a river. Somewhere, a chest is opened and a title stirs. Rank leans like a shadow toward the bed. But power is a cage with velvet on the bars. With honour comes distance. With distance comes substitution. The child may nurse at one breast and be raised by another pair of hands, a custom that suits the architecture of rank, if not the human nerves that once knew the first cry. The mother receives a new room with more light and fewer unsupervised minutes. She meets the truth that women have learned in palaces for longer than paper, has been folded here. A scent rearranges love. Not every ending is a banner. Illness meddles. Fate pretends not to know the rules. A fever on the 9th day. An infection the old remedies can no longer charm. Records learn the word lost and press it flat between names that survived. The palace is kind to grief in public, measured, attired, brief. In private, grief is a geography. A woman walks alone. Candles behave. People do not. And then there are the contestations that courts breed as easily as pines grow cones. Claims advance. This child more legitimate, that child more beloved. A third child invisible until a faction teaches people to see him. Papers answer papers. Testimonies fog the air and then clear as if they were never there. The same books that protect a throne become spears for those who want to tilt it 2 degrees in their direction. You learn quickly that the opposite of chaos is not order. It is paperwork that can be made to point. All the while, the woman who once was a name on a tray becomes a paragraph in the empire's long, slow script. Promotions arrive like a season, inevitable in stories, negotiable in lives. She acquires antechambers, thresholds, a rhythm of visitors who praise without information and leave without answers. She acquires, too, a quiet in the bone that looks like serenity and is actually survival. She speaks less. She remembers more. The palace rewards those who learn to be archival. Stand in her doorway, if you could, and watch the afternoon lay itself across the floor in exactly the shape of a window. You will see what power looks like when it is still, a chair where no one sits until the hour insists, a vase that does not change flowers because the season has not been authorized to turn, a child's garment folded in a drawer like a future rehearsing its lines. You will hear the soft arithmetic of footsteps that know which boards answer and which keep secrets. You will sense the almost sound a sealed book makes. It is not noise, it is pressure. Seeds of destiny, people say, as if destiny were a plant that showed the courtesy to sprout on command. The truth is, colder and kinder in an administrative way. Destiny here is composed, in ink, in signatures, in the even breath of midwives who have watched empires make promises to cradles. It is verified, against calendars, against witnesses, against the quiet knowledge of women whose careers are built on not being surprised. It is then escorted, with ceremony that looks like affection, into a future where boys are taught to bear the weight of a title, and girls are taught to bear the weight of a room. The woman, meanwhile, wears her new name. It fits and it pinches. She keeps a private calendar that records 3 things: days of ease, days of performance, days when memory arrives without appointment. On the last kind, she allows herself to remember the cold of tile in an earlier winter, the lantern trimmed too low, the exact weight of a blanket that pretended to be fate and was actually policy. She smiles, once, not to forgive the building, but to know it. Then she closes the drawer with the small garment inside and calls for tea, and listens for the ledger that is always walking toward her. Survival here is not a feeling, it's a practice. You don't live by courage, you live by calibration. Every kindness is an investment. Every silence is a receipt. The palace teaches the same lesson in 10 dialects. When choice is rationed, cunning is what breath learns to do. Bargains begin small, never with the emperor, rarely with rank, almost always at the temperature of errands. A bolt of good cotton that arrived by mistake. A tin of tea that keeps its fragrance even after 3 pourings. Charcoal when the courtyard is glassy with frost. These are the coins that change hands without names. You don't say bribe, you say remedy, favour. I happen to have this. The building appreciates adverbs. Eunuchs sit where corridors narrow, a geography of permission. Not tyrants, not saints. A guild of gate knowledge. Some keep time like priests. Some keep gossip the way a musician keeps rhythm, not out of malice, out of profession. A junior eunuch learns first how to carry a tray level on uneven stone. Only later does he learn how to tilt a schedule 1 finger width to the left. If he is kind, he does it for warmth in January. If he is ambitious, he does it to be remembered by a woman who may one day have a room that requires bowing. Women learn the same craft from the other side. The senior household matron, hair the colour of winter straw, eyes never surprised, speaks in verbs that mean nothing and accomplish much. Reseed the lamps, double the towels, shift the screen. Each sentence is a small tug on the current. The current moves rooms. Rooms move people. People learn, finally, that some nouns are only walls you push to find the door. Messages travel. The good ones don't look like messages. A perfume sachet sewn slightly heavier than usual. A fan painted with cranes, 3, not 2, sent for the breeze. A ribbon colour that means to exactly 4 women in the East Compound. Not tonight. Nothing treasonous. Everything interpretable as courtesy. The Empire is hard on statements. It is indulgent with gestures. Yes, there is the legend with the dangerous name, steal the dragon, replace the phoenix. A substitution. A body placed where another body should have been. It exists because fear invents shortcuts. It exists because in a hive of faces trained into the same expressions, recognition is a weak guard on a tired night. It is also rare, suicidally rare, because palaces punish improvisation the way oceans punish fire. You need too many hands to be both loyal and quiet. You need a doorway that doesn't creak. You need the consent of luck. If luck refuses, the consequence writes itself in a straight line. Detection, accusation, exemplary sentence. People remember the line. That's why the legend lives mostly as a warning told to girls who are clever enough to try. The real art is quieter. You don't replace the phoenix. You change the wind. A woman who is not well will not ask relief. She will arrange an herbal consultation that happens to require privacy at the hour her corridor usually fills. A woman whose favour burns too bright will not brag. She will send fruit to a rival's nurse and borrow a book she already owns. An overt triumph gathers knives. A shared loaf of bread blunts them. Eunuchs can be predators, protectors, both, often in the same month. Power here is more currency than character. A man who leans too close today may risk himself tomorrow to redirect a rumour that would have damaged a woman who once remembered his mother's name. No one says alliance. They say old understanding. They say it will be remembered. If hands stray or words overreach, the reply, when it comes, is not shouted. A matron rescinds a corridor privilege. A steward's ink dries slower on one petition than another. The palace disciplines through friction. What does a bargain look like when you write it down? It doesn't. It becomes a change in column width, a time shifted by a watch mark, a phrase reassigned due to supply. That means somebody saved somebody else by moving a person from a night to a morning. The ledger is the great laundress of motive. It washes everything until it is the same colour of reasonable. Some women try to pay with beauty. Most learn to pay with competence. The palace eats beauty for breakfast. Competence it stores, like salt. An attendant who never lets a curtain catch. A mistress who remembers a steward's sick child and sends ginger when the air hurts. The price of such memory is not shame. It's appetite. Favours multiply. One day you find yourself with a harvest you cannot eat alone. Threat requires a softer grammar. The story says eunuchs touched, pressed, extracted power disguised as procedure. The record prefers not to see those angles. Between them, as usual, lives the practice, not universal, not lawful, not safe, of proximity turned into leverage. The women answer with calculations disguised as stillness. Accept nothing that cannot be translated into rooms, into hours, into a nurse posted at the right door. Refuse nothing loudly. Loudness invites policy. Policy arrives with a chorus and writes epilogues you do not get to edit. Accusations are their own currency. A rival can be ruined with a misnamed scent left in the wrong alcove, a hairpin reported as improper near a threshold where pins are never proper. Courts adore cleanliness, therefore a speck can be a blade. The art is to keep your own floor bare of specks while sweeping your rage into general dust. You will not see your enemy fall. You will see her corridor grow longer, and the men beyond these walls, ministers with seals, cousins with ambitions, do they touch this world, constantly through pockets of patronage that feel like weather. A cousin's marriage shifts which households share festivals, a governor's fall. 3 provinces away makes coal allotments misbehave here in late winter. The empire is not a map you can fold. It is a fabric that pulls when any thread is disturbed. Women learn to mend without comment. On certain afternoons, when the light enters like advice, a small council convenes that no ordinance recognizes. 2 senior maids, a matron, the woman whose room breathes a bit more quickly these days. Tea, deliberately ordinary. They discuss nothing. They repair everything. A servant with loose morals is moved to a corridor where morals have no opportunity. A steward's nephew is found a place far from the place he could do damage. A careless phrase uttered by a jealous singer is converted into a joke before it evolves into a charge. This is governance too, the homemaking kind. Empires rarely say thank you, and then there is the price of cunning, what it takes from the hands that practice it. Sleep that never drops all the way down. Smiles that live at the corners of the mouth and never reach the eyes. A way of listening that file clips every sentence before it can bruise. The cost is paid in small coins, the habit of standing where you can see both doors, the reflex to count cups on a tray, the inability, years later, to believe that anyone means only exactly what they said. You survive. You pay for it by never stopping. Sometimes a mercy arrives that looks like nothing at all. A junior eunuch steps a pace slower, so a woman's breath can neatly match his on a set of stairs. A matron pretends not to notice the tremor in a hand pouring tea and phones for a physician by discussing the colour of chrysanthemums. A clerk miscopies a date in a way that makes punishment seem premature. By the time the ink is corrected, anger has forgotten what it wanted. None of it is noble. All of it is human. If the substitution legend belongs to fable, another legend belongs to practice, that the safest power is the kind divided so finely no one can see it when it works. The women become artisans of the invisible. The eunuchs, sometimes against their own intention, become the loom. Together they produce what palaces require to seem immortal. Continuity. Continuity is just survival that learned to keep a straight face. At night, when lamps skinny down and the hive resumes its professional hush, a woman stands at her window and invents a prayer with the ingredients she trusts. Let no one remember what they should not. Let the tray bear the weight it must and not more. Let favours balance like scales that have no interest in drama. Let my name be ordinary ink until the hour it needs to be bold. She doesn't say, Amen. She closes the window slowly, so the latch will not learn a habit of noise, and sleeps on the side where her heart makes the quieter sound. The palace will call this prudence. She will call it breathing. Cunning is not a crime here. It is the last right left to the living. It begins with a calendar written where no clerk can see it, a private moon steady as a drum underwater. The empire keeps one timetable, the body keeps another. Most days they negotiate. On red days, they collide. In a world that crowns the emperor son of heaven, blood is not simply blood. It is omen, ritual hazard, the possibility that a private hour could stain a cosmic fiction. The court's imagination is full of purity metaphors, clean lines, clean lamps, clean hands, and the stories say a speck can undo a ceremony. The women hear those stories early. They learn to carry two almanacs, the official one folded in paper, and the one the pulse remembers. The summons, when it falls on the wrong night, is a blade with a polite voice. Prepare. Not cruel, not kind, just punctual. The room changes temperature. Bowls heat. Oils breathe. A blanket waits like policy folded into cotton. And inside one body, unannounced to the roster, a tide is already in. Fear arrives in fragments. The thought of a stain. The thought of punishment drawn in capital ink. The thought of a rumour that sours a season. What happens now is not drama, it's craft. Whispered solutions have wandered through centuries like house ghosts. A ring, gold, light, worn on certain days. The old tale says its name puns against a warning, a private homophone for I am not in season. Another tale keeps a red dot, small, neat, placed high on the cheek where palace women read more than the face says. There are stories of a slender ribbon tied at the wrist under a sleeve, of a red lantern hung by a door where lanterns mean everything and nothing depending on who is looking. None of these has the dignity of statute. All of them have the stamina of need. The safer method wears the colour of paperwork. Somewhere between Jing Shifang and the women who manage approach corridors, a quiet apparatus exists for rescheduling without scandal. A senior attendant notes a physician's day. A steward adjusts coal allotments so another room will be warmer, and therefore available, tonight. A rota breathes. No proclamation, no moral. Only logistics with mercy in it. Taboo is a kind of music, strong bass line, little melody. The logic goes like this. The throne is a ritual object dressed as a person. Ritual objects dislike blood. Therefore the knight must not risk it. The stories exaggerate. Threats grow teeth in kitchens. Beheading, someone whispers, because fear loves an imperial verb. More often, the punishment for violating the palace's sense of timing is administrative. A chill shift in rank, a corridor moved farther from the stove, a season of eyes that forget to see you. But the possibility of ruin does not need law to be effective. It needs only repetition. So the women practice discretion as if it were scripture. A maid goes to the Imperial Medical Office claiming a headache that requires an afternoon's quiet. The physician understands, marks a leaf in a ledger without flourish, prescribes broth. A matron reroutes a music lesson. A eunuch whose job is timing pretends to dislike the draft in one corridor and closes it for the night. The machine is capable of small kindness when kindness looks like order. Do people sometimes try the old signals? Of course, because they are compact, portable, plausible, because a ring can be a ring until it is a sentence, because a dot can be a beauty mark until it is reprieve. But codes fatigue when rooms learn them. Fresh signals circulate, a fan pattern, a hair part shifted, a thread of red inside a white sleeve. The price of code is constant invention. The reward is one uneventful night. There are hard nights, a summons that cannot be sidestepped, an hour that will not move. On those nights, courage looks like precision. Layers prepared to fail quietly. Linens doubled. A secondary basin placed where hands can find it without looking. Attendants trained to be oceans, to take in a shock and return the surface to glass. Nothing heroic, nothing cinematic. The heroism here is competence. Jealousy, meanwhile, is tireless. Rivals watch schedules the way astronomers watch skies, looking for patterns, eclipses, unlucky conjunctions. A badly timed visit becomes a whisper, becomes a diagnosis, becomes a moral. A woman whose favour burns warm may find that rumours are oxygen. feeding what they pretend to scold. The defense is the same as ever. Get there first with the administrative truth, a physician's note, a steward's signature, a rota annotation in a calm hand. Palaces don't abolish gossip. They drown it in documents. The staff, who are often kinder than the building that pays them, cultivate a culture of non-theatrical rescue. An older maid keeps a drawer of darker cloths for winter drafts, used only when winter drafts are not the problem. A junior eunuch learns to walk between lamp and eyeline at exactly the right moment, so a blush can fade unnoticed. A matron, seeing panic rise in a throat, speaks a sentence about coal usage that no one needs to hear and gives the room 3 extra breaths. These are the tiny mercies that have no plaque and outlast empires. Religion hums beneath the etiquette, purity and pollution, auspice and offence. The palace borrows old words and files them smooth. What matters is not theology, it's predictability. If a red day becomes an accident, predictability collapses into story. Stories multiply, gather factions, grow teeth. Therefore, remove risk before it turns into narrative. The women understand that line better than anyone. They also understand its cost. The feeling of being politely erased by a timetable you did not author. And what of the legends that make kitchens glow? Substitutions, deceptions, daring escapes. They exist because fear makes artists of us. They exist because sometimes in a sea of faces trained to stillness, recognition fails. But the ordinary genius is not swapping bodies, it is bending schedules, switching a lesson, advancing a bath, inventing a reason to be elsewhere without being absent. The bravest act here is often the most boring one, paperwork with nerve. When the system works, which is to say when nobody has to pretend it didn't, the night ends as cleanly as it began. The tray departs to its shelf. A ledger acquires one more line that looks like all the others. The woman sleeps. In the morning, a red dot is a red dot again. Pretty, meaningless, a rumour retired. The ring is only gold. The ribbon is only ribbon. Relief never asks for applause. On festival days, the palace loves red. Lanterns, seals, couplets, drums. In these rooms, the colour is more complicated. It can mean celebration or caution, promotion or reprieve, emblem or error. The women hold both meanings at once, because they must. They become translators between 2 calendars that cannot be reconciled and must still be made to agree. Translation here is not language, it is survival. If you stand where the eaves listen, you will hear how ordinary this courage sounds. Physician. Tomorrow, another corridor. Phrases with no literature in them, and more mercy than a speech. When the body's moon moves on and the building's sun insists on shining, the world reseats itself with a small click. The woman breathes. The matron drinks tea that has gone cold. The eunuch marks a column. No one tells the story because no one wants a story. In palaces, the highest craft is making danger look like nothing happened. Some lessons are written once and read forever. This is one of them. Your life is not a poem, not here. It is a schedule you help to edit under a different name. Keep your signals small. Keep your notes tidy. Trust logistics more than miracles. And when the red days come, remember that ritual fears stains more than it fears lies. So give the ritual what it needs, and keep yourself alive. When the court moves, the map pretends to loosen, and the palace breathes through different lungs. Heat swells in the capital. Cicadas turn every tree into a rattle. Tempers thin. The solution is ancient and practical. The emperor travels. Lakes to the west, gardens that pretend to be wilderness. A mountain resort whose roofs cool the skull like a hand dipped in spring water. People call it retreat. The files call it relocation. On the road, rules go into travel dress. Corridors become colonnades of pines, thresholds become footbridges, bells become boatmen calling to each other at dusk. The same machine runs, lighter, quieter, folded down to its essentials. The office that touches the Emperor's day does not stay behind with the vermilion paint. It comes along in trunks and habit. Ledgers travel better than beds. Ink is easier to move than walls. And yet, something changes. The air carries a permission the courtyards never learned. On water, sound lifts and drifts. Conversations become weather. In pavilions, lamps take their time. Perfumed smoke loses its city edge. A woman who has lived by angles notices that nature has none that must be bowed to. Even procedures loosen their belts. The roster speaks in shorter sentences. An evening can be arranged by gesture, by familiarity, by that practical kindness senior attendants acquire when distance makes the city's stare feel far away. Out here, people say, the ritual forgets itself. Not quite. It remembers without insisting. Name tags, if trays exist tonight at all, appear as a courtesy, not as scripture. A messenger's token does what a clatter of lacquer once did. The choice has the same ingredients. It simply cooks in a different pot. A matron, meeting the water with her eyes, adjusts an hour as if she were smoothing silk. Time replies, as you wish. Paths that once policed approach and return now split into slips and islands. Boats take the shape of corridors. Willows become screens that move. A woman approaches not along a ruler-straight walkway but over shifting boards, a lantern painting the water with a trembling title. She discovers a feeling the city does not permit, that arrival can be graceful instead of correct, that grace can be both softer and more exacting than rules. Spontaneity, the word the kitchens adore, appears in careful increments. A music lesson extended because the breeze remembered the right key. An extra cup of tea poured because the sun delayed setting on a stand of reeds. A conversation that almost becomes laughter before the room remembers to behave. These are not rebellions. They are edits. They let a night behave more like a night and less like a memorandum that discovered a bed. The watchers still watch. They simply change uniforms, rain capes, straw sandals, boat poles. A eunuch who once stood like a column now balances like a fisherman. He minds time by the length of a shadow on water. He minds silence by the way. Voices travel over reeds. When the moment comes to end the hour, he summons the tone that belongs to lakes. Not a knock, not a cry, a name spoken twice, neither louder nor softer than the wind. There is a rumour that outside the capital, rules dissolve entirely. The rumour mistakes relief for anarchy. Even among mountains, the empire wants tomorrow to refer to tonight without embarrassment. Notes are kept, signals are agreed upon. Physicians learn the paths between pavilions the way they once learned which staircase creaked in winter. The machine does not stop, it paces itself. A visit remains a bracketed piece of time that can be shown to morning without blushing. But here, because the sky is closer and the roofs are less stern, women feel the outline of another life. A bench under pines where resin sweetens the shade. A pond where carp inherit the day's gold and spend it under lilies. The hour before moonrise when the garden rehearses a hush that has nothing to do with command. In that hour, a woman can almost hear her own breath without asking a room's permission. Almost. Attendants practice a different species of mercy in these places. They learn to arrive by water, which means they learn to leave no wake. A cup is set down on a railing, not a table. A blanket is warmed by sun instead of brazier. A screen is a branch that can be moved one leaf's width, and call it shade. Their competence changes flavor. It keeps ritual from declaring itself when ritual would spoil the afternoon. Jealousy travels too. It is lighter than trunks. The old arithmetic resumes under new trees. Who was seen walking which path at which hour? Whose pavilion burned more oil? Whose music reached the water after midnight? But gossip wears itself out faster outdoors. It lacks the echoes that corridors provide. A sentence spoken under pines dissolves. Court intrigue, deprived of its favourite acoustics, drops a note. For the emperor, movement is a cure that requires physicians. Distance restores appetite. For scenery, for sport, for the feeling that choice belongs to a person and not a desk. But distance also multiplies eyes. Retinues swell. Stewards whose duties once fit on an abacus now need maps. The intimacy rumour celebrates is alive and observed. If fondness finds room to breathe, its breath is counted. If tenderness visits, it remembers to wear shoes that do not squeak. There are nights that do look simpler. A boat untied late. A lantern carried like a private moon. The path between two pavilions given over to feet that want to be feet and not choreography. The return as unremarkable as the approach. No tray, no script. A permission that feels absolute because the water chose not to tell anyone. If you stand at the right distance, you can mistake this for freedom. The women who live closer do not, because morning is still a clerk. The sun takes attendance. The garden, which kept last night's confidence, yields to ledgers that require their steady nouns and times. A physician asks about pulse. A matron asks about rest. A eunuch notes the hour a lamp went dark. The lake looks innocent. The ink knows better. You can drift at midnight. By 9, you must be legible. And yet the weeks out here do something the city cannot. They permit memory to arrive without punishment. A scent, whetstone, pine, the particular sweetness of a melon, stricter gardens never perfectly ripen, stays in the room and is not corrected. A woman washing her hands studies the way sunlight combs the water and feels, not happiness exactly, not safety, the kind of recognition that does not ask for witnesses. The building in her bones looks up and pauses. It is the politest form of relief the empire can afford. The legend says, away from the walls there are no rules. What it means is kinder. Away from the walls, rules discover a softer vocabulary. The basic grammar remains, schedule, witness, notation, but the sentences are shorter and sometimes end without a period. Pause. Look. Yes, that does not require a tray. The women become fluent quickly. They have been learning dialects of obedience all their lives. Of course the season ends. A cold breath drops from the mountain. A boatman speaks to his pole as if persuading it to let summer go. Trunks are closed, seals impressed, lists checked against lists. Pavilions return to their occupation of being beautiful and mostly empty. The road home borrows its dust from last year. Back in the capital, the roofs remember how to be roofs. The city exhales the garden. The garden keeps the echo. What remains is not the story the kitchens want. A night unguarded, a chain snapped, an empire made generous by trees. What remains is smaller and truer. A handful of hours each year when the machine felt like a hand instead of a jaw. A memory carried inside a woman like a small lake, cool even in autumn, deep enough to quiet a thought before it becomes a noise. When she returns to corridors, she returns with that water. She drinks from it in rooms that cultivate thirst. Later, when the ledger calls and the lamps behave and the tray resumes its profession, someone will whisper that in the mountains a rule forgot its name. She will smile, a private punctuation. and say nothing. The truth requires neither defence nor boast. It wore sandals. It crossed a bridge of light. It returned on time. And in the line the clerk writes that evening, routine, obedient, bloodless, the garden will hide, perfectly intact, between two characters that look like any two characters the Empire ever wrote. At the rim of the hive, where corridors forget their names and braziers learn to cool, a door opens into air that bites. People call it Cold Palace, as if a plaque existed. It doesn't. It is a direction, not a room. Farther from warmth, farther from voices, farther from the route where mornings turn into days. Punishment here is architectural. A hallway lengthens, a stove goes missing. Time drops 2 degrees and stays there. A woman can hear herself breathe, not because she is free, but because the building has stopped answering her. The Empire prefers demotions that do not require a trumpet. A misstep enters the record like a splinter. The splinter reddens a month. The month teaches a lesson. Exile arrives as a change in path rather than a change in title. The file remains tidy. The feet testify. In these rooms, blankets weigh more. Cups cool faster. Footsteps remember where music used to be. To survive, you learn the science of small fires. A coal kept under ash. A thought kept under silence. A name kept under breath. No one is allowed to love. We began there, not as poetry, but as policy felt in the ribs. No one is allowed to choose. The harem's genius is to make those sentences look like etiquette. A bowed head, a folded hour, a ledger that smiles without changing its face. Women become experts in translation, feelings into gestures, fear into schedules, hope into objects that can be inventoried. The machine thrives because translation is less noisy than rebellion. What history can promise is not sympathy, it is clarity. The myths we carried through the story, crawling, the blanket, name tags that behave like oracles, remain what they are. Powerful theatre, unevenly documented. The records we set beside them, offices, rosters, medical notes, genealogies, remain what they are. Cool instruments built to survive arguments. The women live between both because life does. Rumour can keep you alive when law is tired. Paper can protect you when rumour hungers. The art was knowing which god to pray to before dawn. Return to the object that began so many nights. The piece of wood small enough to hide in a child's sleeve, heavy enough to tilt a woman's season. Whether carved as legend says or copied as bureaucracy prefers, the name tag is less a relic than a mirror. It shows what the palace wants to believe about itself. Order descending as choice. Destiny compressed into touch. The truth, as always, is more plural. A tray glides. A clerk writes. A senior maid nods at a corridor no one notices. Between these 3 motions, a life moves. Behind the thin silk curtain, what truly transpired. You listened for an answer. The honest one is careful. Intimacy in these rooms was not private weather. It was a state ritual performed at the scale of skin, witnessed at a distance, timed, entered in ink. Could tenderness fit inside that frame? Yes, sometimes, as contraband. Could cruelty hide? Inside procedure, often, because procedure is polite when it is unkind. The room did what it was built to do, convert danger into order. The women did what human beings do, smuggle meaning through checkpoints. If a child came, the world redrew itself. If a child did not, the map stayed hard. We watched the arithmetic of heirs, midwives walking like commas between clauses of history, physicians learning to be archivists of breath. We saw how a son could become a staircase, how a daughter could be loved and still measured against metal. We watched titles waken chests. We watched grief become a geography with no guides. Promotion felt like sunlight through a lattice, patterned, conditional, bright where allowed. Loss felt like water under a door, quiet, persistent, everywhere. We learned the price of cunning, the cost paid in posture, in sleep that never falls to the bottom, in a listening that file clips every sentence. We learned the mercy of competence, a towel folded into the shape of relief, a matron inventing 3 breaths by talking about coal, a junior eunuch walking a pace slower so panic can become air again. None of this will earn a line in a chronicle. All of it kept the chronicle from having to write a worse line. We walked the red days, 2 calendars colliding in one body, and watched logistics outperform miracle. We travelled to summer pavilions where rules spoke a softer dialect and learned the difference between freedom and reprieve. Freedom sings, reprieve hums. The women took the hum home and kept it like a lake under their ribs. In the city, when lamps behaved and paper behaved and the tray resumed its profession, that lake stayed cold, stayed kind, stayed theirs. And then the phrase that palaces teach you to respect, and then the years pass. Faces acquire the serenity of people who learn to be archival. Rooms acquire reputations of weather, this one lenient in spring, that one strict in frost. A laugh that should not exist learns to exist only in the time it takes to move a cup. A woman who began as a name on a roster becomes the paragraph that decides an afternoon. Another woman, demoted to the edge of warmth, becomes the proverb girls whisper to protect themselves in the future. The machine writes its minutes. The city inside the city continues to believe that rule is mercy in formal attire. What remains, after ledgers are bound into months, after months are tied into years, after years are stacked like season boxes no one opens, are quiet ledgers and colder rooms and eyes that remember. A clerk dies, his handwriting survives him. A matron retires to a courtyard we are not allowed to see. Her invisible repairs keep working in women she taught to breathe on command. The eunuch who held time like a bowl finds that time tips anyway. He lowers the lamp one last time and is not mentioned again. Archives are brutal and fair in the same stroke. We are left with the city's 2 truths, the archive and the whisper. The archive says, this happened at this hour, witnessed by these hands, signed in this ink. The whisper says, and also, the blanket weighed like policy. The floor was winter, the door spoke in wood. A heart rehearsed a sentence it could never say aloud, and this too was history. You do not have to choose between them to be honest. You have to hold both and keep your voice steady. If you want a single object to carry the weight of all we have seen, take the tag, or take the ledger, or take the cup warmed so a mouth would not startle. Every object in these rooms is a verb, to choose, to record, to soothe, to erase. The palace survives by making verbs look like furniture. The women survived by remembering that furniture moves. No one is allowed to love. Repeat it, then soften it with what we learned. Love found ways, not speeches, gestures, not claims, continuities. A nurse who stayed, a window a little wider at dusk, a chair placed for a back that ached. Love here was not a banner, it was a practice quiet enough to pass inspections. That does not absolve the machine. It dignifies the people the machine tried to flatten. We end where we began, at a door that is more instruction than wood, at a breath that refuses to be entirely obedient. The curtain lowers, as it always does. Outside, a clerk brushes his sleeve and writes a final line with the calm of someone who believes paper is safer than wind. Inside, a woman touches the rim of a cup that once warmed her courage and sets it down so gently the air does not notice. The empire will say, everything proceeded. The ledger will say, time began here and ended there. Between those 2 sentences, A life unfolded and did not waste itself. Listen, the building inhales, the lamps behave, the eaves collect a last bead of night. Somewhere, a tray retires to its shelf. Somewhere, a rumour curls up to sleep like a cat. Somewhere, a name travels into tomorrow as ink and as breath. What remains is not scandal, not spectacle, only this: a long discipline of being human under rules that prefer adjectives like orderly and correct. We have told it without shouting. We have stood where the walls could hear. We have left room for the part the archive cannot say. And if you are tempted to ask at the very end who won, the honest answer is narrow and sufficient. Continuity did. It always does in palaces. Continuity is the name paperwork gives to survival. And yet, in the pauses, in the repairs, in the unreported mercies, another thing persisted. Call it dignity. Call it courage that never asks for applause. Call it the quiet art of not disappearing. The door closes, not cruelly, not kindly, simply in the manner doors have learned here, with accuracy. The city goes on keeping its own weather. We set down the tag. We close the book. We listen while the last lamp counts itself to dark.